There are many things that we can take away from the Ugly Duckling story by Hans Christian Andersen. Probably one of the first important things that a child might take away from the story is this sympathy for the ugly duckling itself, who is ostracized, ridiculed, teased, and taunted, and so forth. For the melancholy child, this is important, for they obtain a degree of comfort from knowing that someone understands their pain. And for the choleric child, it's important also to sympathize with the ugly duckling so that they are less judgmental of others who are different than they are. And so they begin to see that, we don't always see on the surface the qualities of an individual. And sometimes they are not disclosed till later on. But each of us have these beautiful talents and goodness about us. So it's important to refrain from making these quick judgments on what and how we might appear. And another thing that children get from this story, especially as they're turning 8, is when they're trying to become more aware of their own uniqueness. This story really says, look, you can be yourself, and your painting, your drawing is just as, has its own uniqueness to it and quality. You don't have to copy your neighbor, but you can be yourself and see the goodness of that. To see the beauty that comes out of your own personality onto the page, if you will. So it really allows the child to feel themselves and to be who they are, to refrain from being envious of others, other gifts, and to find their own self-reliance, if you will. At the root or core of the meaning of the story, though, is really about the human soul. The soul that is in the story is the swans. They represent the soul in this story. They're the perfect archetype of the soul because they are so dignified. They're dignified creatures. They have this sense of humility about them as well, though. So, and they're gentle and graceful like the soul. And it's hidden as well to not only the world, but even to our own self. We are not always completely aware of that in our lives. So let's go through the story and just take a look at what's going on and why I believe this is really teaching us something about our soul. The story is really divided into 7 parts, which designates the age at which a child is coming to an awareness of their uniqueness. And they undergo a developmental change at age 7 to 8, which I call the age of accountability. So you'll see these 7 parts of the story unfold, and they are separated into a number of challenges, a number of scenarios. The first one is the single egg that's left in the nest of the duck. That's larger than the others, and when it's hatched, this mysterious duckling comes out. He's larger and much uglier than the other ducklings. But the mother points out that it's it can't be a turkey because it does enjoy the water, and it has an affinity for swimming. So although for his other differences, they're so radical that the duckling is taunted and teased and ridiculed, ostracized in the barnyard, and where they have kind of this hierarchy established of the overlord's manor, the girl that feeds him in the barnyard, and then all the the noble fat duck and the turkey and all the other ducks there. You have this kind of hierarchy structure built there, and it becomes so terribly bad for the this ugly duckling. He's become so rejected by the culture in this barnyard that he flees. He runs away over to the only place he really can go, and that's out into the wild. So this is really the beginning of this. You'll see in the story going to his domestic human side of him, which is represented by this barnyard and the hierarchical structure of his tribe or his religious order or community that he belongs to. And then, because he doesn't meet those expectations there, and in fact, by human standards, if you're not accepted by your own community from their own expectations, it can be the harshest environment to live in. And you really don't have much choice to either conform or to leave, if you don't have any negotiating power within that community. So the duckling does leave into the wild, which is a constant theme in this story. You'll see that he goes back to the human world, then back to the natural wild world, back to the human world. All the time, this tension between what is human in me, what is wild and natural in me, trying to find a place to be accepted. So while he's in the wild, he meets these ducks, wild drakes, and they refuse to have him part of their group because they're afraid of not so much his appearance, like the community and he belonged to in the hierarchical order, but rather whether he will taint the gene pool. And so, survival is important in the wild, and you don't want someone entering in there that can hinder the survival rate of the species. And then you see the two gander ducks. He stays there for 2 days. Then the two ganders come. Those two ganders represent the second stage of his development, going into this wild world, trying to decide what's human, what's natural and wild within him. And these ducks taunt him or pretend to like him, but their real motive is to initiate him into the wild by humiliating him in front of these lady geese. At that moment, there's gunfire, and there's humans that are surrounding the lake. These hunters begin an all-out war. And of course, he's overwhelmed with fear. So this wild world isn't any easier than the barnyard by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually perhaps even more difficult. It's filled with really this element of survival. At least in the barnyard, he had the security of the hierarchical structure. Now he's on his own. And if he doesn't have the right genes, if he doesn't fit in to the wild order, he's going to be balked. And in some sense, in the world, um, it's all-out war, which is representative of the hunters and the hunted. So this fear in the natural world of survival is really characteristic of that side of us, of the rather than this human side. But the third phase of the story, he does go back into kind of a temporary human side. He finds this little shack, and three individuals or dwellers live there: the old lady, the cat, and the old hen. And those three represent the third phase. And they are really represent human wisdom. The cat is the clever one, and the hen is the wise one, and the old woman is the wisest of all. And the hen points out to the duckling, who finds that his instinctive impulse for the water there. And as he shares this with the hen, she points out what a silly notion that is, how absurd that is, and if you're worth, your anything at all, why you would be able to do something productive or provide some kind of amusement for the old lady, like the duck and the hen does. They make eggs, and the cat provides the amusement of arching his back and purring. So if you can't do something, the hen says, you're not worth much. Well, that's the harsh reality of the human world, really, of the philosophy of men. And, because what's really important in the end is, and again, it's not so much your appearance in this case, it's more of, are you useful or amusing? The duckling finds that that's not appealing to him. He has this strong urge to go back to the water, so he does. Now he's returning back to the natural world again. But this time, in the autumn season, and the seasons is emphasized in this part of the story, which I believe is representative of the fourth stage of the story, coming from the four seasons. But the four seasons come and go, and at times being out in the wild can be a delight, but then winter comes and it can be very, very difficult. So at this time, he's in the wild. He, in this splendid autumn scene, he comes to a recognition of a flock of swans. And if you know the ending of the story, you realize that this is who he really is. He senses that here, although he doesn't ever come to a real understanding of it. But he senses that he has a real connection with these swans. He even says he loves them more than anything he's loved before. But the swans flee. They go to warmer climates, leaves him there alone in the natural elements of the cold. So this can be representative in our life where we have spiritual experiences, because but we may be asleep to what they really mean for us. They happen to us, but they're tenuous and fleeting, and we don't. One is they may seem irrational and feeling based, as opposed to the hard logic of the hen and the cat, and so we dismiss them outright, sometimes, or we may feel unworthy of them at all because, well, that might be for somebody else, maybe the saints or some noble person, but not for me because I'm a crooked and imperfect individual. So the swans leave, and then we go into the fifth stage of the story. The fifth stage of the story is he treads as hard as he can to keep himself from freezing in this lake. But the more he treads, the tighter he gets, and eventually it overtakes him. You can't conquer time. You can't conquer the seasons. The seasons eventually, and nature itself, you know, um, will eventually overtake you. But thankfully, when he's frozen into the lake, a good farmer, and we're going back to the human side of him again, the good farmer rescues him and brings him into his home where he's given food and warmth, and he comes to a full recovery. This represents being saved in the physical world, and the human world has the ability to do that. But here again, he's come to distrust that side of him. He doesn't feel like the human world, even if it's playful children, um, can be trusted. It's crooked. It was in his past experience that it's full of imperfections and not worthy of trust. And so the wild, ugly duckling flees the scene. He goes into the sixth stage of the story, which is the harsh winter that he stays in this cave. It's the author Hans Christian Andersen says, or Hans Christian Andersen, he says that it was so painful that it's unspeakable. Can't you even express it with words? And of course, all suffering really not possible to express in words. It's beyond that. It's, the glacier that's knocking on the cupboard doors, that the desert that is sighing in the bed, the crack in the teacup that opens up this lane to the land of the dead. These natural, the natural world of starvation, no food in the cupboard, but just the glacier, freezing cold. Or it can be the desert, whichever one takes you. And there's no teacup or tea to provide any healing, but it leaks all out in the human world and opens up this lane to the land of the dead. So, he's there in the suffering and cold, but he manages to survive. This sixth stage is really going through hell. It's passing through death, but not the physical death that he experienced earlier in the ice. This one is more of a spiritual death. And the reason why I say that is because at the end of this winter scene, his wings are actually stronger, more vigorous. And he lifts himself off the ground, and they're capable of now carrying him much further distances, so far that he goes into a whole new land. And the land that he goes to is almost a paradise. It's full of flowers and apple trees, and with full bloom, the lilacs over the crystal clear stream. And there at this paradise is these three swans. Why is there three? Why isn't there four or two? Well, I explained the significance of the number three in the Three Little Men story, um, where the girl is in the wilderness and goes to the cottage of the three little men. They bestow upon her, and I went into great depth there. If you want to know more about the number three, I suggest you look at the interpretation of the three little men that I sent. But in here, I'm just going to say that they represent the Trinity, or the power of reformation, spiritual power of reformation within you. They represent truth, beauty, and goodness, or love. So he sees these three swans, and he has not the courage to face them, does not have the courage to come into their presence, because why? His heart is still crooked and imperfect and ugly. And he's about to fly out of this paradise. But then he gets the idea that it's better to die with this truth and beauty, within the beauty of the world, than have to go back to the pecking hens and the nipping ducks and the suffering of the world. So he gets the courage to face this. It's the looking into the mirror, facing your distress. And even though life is a blessing, you cannot bless. But this part of the story, most people remember, he gets into the pond, clear water, and then he sees his reflection back, and he finds that he isn't actually the ugly duckling, but the beautiful swan. He sees his soul, sees who he really is, which is basically a reflection of the other three swans, representing truth, beauty, and goodness. I also point out in this story that, like the little men in the woods, the garden represents the Holy Spirit of comfort, as opposed to the harsh winter outside. And the water, crystal clear stream that he sees his image in, is representative of the blood of Christ. And that is the image that he actually sees in the stream, is his divinity, his soul reflected back at him. And then the three swans represent the inherited gifts from the Father of truth, beauty, and love. Now, this garden, is a human world. We know that from the end of the story, because the children come out to feed them with the bread and the cakes. And I think one of the important things of this story is brought out here. As Hans Christian Andersen says, that the swan begins to feel appreciation for all the suffering and the hardship that he passed through. That if he had to give something up in life, it would be the good and the pleasurable things, and he would hold on to those sufferings that he had to endure, because it was through those that he was actually able to understand, when he met up with beauty, when he met up with his good fortune, he would be able to recognize it and appreciate it. That's the message that this story is conveying. It is the recognition of our own soul. And without the sufferings of our lives, we would be unable to recognize it when we saw it. Similar to what Christ taught when he said, "He who's willing to lose his life for my sake will find it." And when he taught Peter Although Peter did deny him 3 times, Christ did instruct him that who is willing to gain the whole world, or what does a man profit by gaining the whole world but lose his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What the part of the story we don't often remember here is what the duckling did just before he saw his image. He lowered his head and he said, "Kill me." Then he saw his image in the water. That lowering of the head was a metaphor of forsaking the world, of rejecting the human and the natural world evils, and turning to face or taking responsibility for his own soul, for the truth, for the beauty, and the goodness that is part of him. So that's the interpretation of this beautiful story. And it is very, in my view, similar to the Three Little Men in the Woods story, but a little different take on it. It also has some similarities in numbers. We got the 7 stages in the story, vacillating between the natural world and the human world, trying to figure out which one of those I belong in, and ultimately neither one. So it's an interesting story.